the imperative of Muslim unity is even greater than ever before. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the command, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, hold fast, all of you, to the rope of Allah, and do not be divided. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and do not be divided. And if we are divided, and we have boxing gloves and we just love to box, oh yes, we love a boxing match, and the divisions are now in cement, and there's hatred and animosity for each other, what will be the consequence when we stand for judgment before Allah? So now more than ever before, we've got to look again at the Sufi-Salafi divide. Look more than ever before at the Shia-Sunni divide, and struggle with our hearts and with our intellect to see what can we do to bring these dividing factions together under a common roof. The answer stares us in the face. Hold on to the rope of Allah. It is the rope of Allah that will unite us, not a conference held in a hall, and they have their representatives and they have their representatives, and the endless cups of coffee all through the night as they're struggling to find some common agreement that will bring Shia and Sunni together, or Sufi and Salafi together. You're going to run out of coffee. No. It is the rope of Allah which will unite us. What is that rope of Allah which will unite us? I leave behind me two things. If you hold on to them, you will never go astray. The book of Allah and my sunnah. Although there are those who dispute the authenticity of this statement. The book of Allah and my sunnah. And so we say, if we are to be united, it is the book of Allah which must unite us, not a conference. If we are to be united, if we are to build bridges with each other to come under a common roof, Sufi, Salafi, Shia, Sunni, it is the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, his sunnah. And so while we may have tolerated all through the ages, from the time, the earliest times to this age, we may have tolerated religious practices which were manifestly beneficial. Oh yes. But they were not based on the Quran, and they were not based on the universally accepted Sunnah. Don't look at me so worried now. Then regardless of how beneficial these religious practices may have been, regardless of whether generations past were practicing them, in Akhirul Zaman, the imperative of unity supersedes everything else. And so in Akhirul Zaman, in order to forge unity and bring our people under a common roof, we say that in the house of Allah we will start the unity drive. In the house of Allah. That in the house of Allah we will restrict ourselves to only those religious practices which are based on the Quran and the universally accepted Sunnah. Now people are going to be angry with Imran Hussein. What can I do? I am pursuing the greater good, something which will unite us. But unfortunately, it's not like that. No, it's not like that. Here is a religious practice which developed over time, which is not a part of the universally accepted Sunnah. We are not talking about sending salams on the Prophet. Everybody do that. Sufi, Salafi, Shia, Sunni, everybody do that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a religious practice in which you send salams in a particular way. And that is, you stand up and you recite, you sing. That's what we're talking about. Not the other salam which everybody does. So we say, and this is going to, of course, make us unpopular. But for the cause of the greater good, we have to muster the courage to say, in the masjid, we say no, not in the masjid. In the public life of the jama'ah, we say no. But you can do it in your private life. And if anybody comes to criticize you and condemn you about what you're doing in your private life, we will ship him out of our village faster than Federal Express, because you're an agent of fitna. My private life is my private life. In this way, here is an example where the Sufi divide is now being brought under some measure of control, and we are persuading people to take the boxing gloves and put them away. Another example, the celebration of the life, the birth anniversary of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. I am the student, alhamdulillah, of Maulana Fadlur Rahman Ansari rahimahullah, and he was no ordinary alim. Oh no, South Africa knows that. And he was the student of Maulana Abdul Alim Siddiqui rahimahullah, and he was no ordinary muballigh. South Africa knows that. So I come from that chain, and it is someone who's come from that chain who is speaking this way. So I must have thought very carefully before speaking the way I am speaking, because my teacher stood up and recited salam on the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and my teacher celebrated the Miladun Nabi, as did this. So why is Imran speaking like this? Why? Because of Akhirul Zaman. Because of the tests and trials of Akhirul Zaman. That's why. And what would be the implications if we do not heed the advice and the warning? Do you know that in Sahih Bukhari the hadith is repeated 4 times? 4 times? Mutawatir? That on Judgment Day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to Adam alayhi salam and says to him, take out the people for Jahannam. You know the hadith, don't you? Huh? Some of you shaking your heads. Adam alayhi salam asks, how many are there, O Allah? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, out of every 1,000, take 999 for Jahannam. That is the mother of all warnings. The companions were terrified. And he smiled and he said, the one for Jannah will be from you. Someone who follows the true deen. But then he went on to say that the 999 will all be the people of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog. So this is a statement which applies to Akhirul Zaman, because Gog and Magog belong to Akhirul Zaman. So now we need to ask the question, are we living in Akhirul Zaman? Well, Akhir Zaman will culminate with a man standing up in Jerusalem, and Nabi Muhammad ﷺ described him to us. And he will declare that I am the Messiah, Al-Masih. But he could only make that declaration and get people to accept it if he's ruling the world. Because he is Al-Masih al-Dajjal. He has to impersonate the true Messiah who would rule the world when he comes back. In order for him to convince the Jews that he is indeed the Messiah, it means that, number one, he's got to take control of the Holy Land, which is under control of Muslims. He's done that already. He's got to bring the Jews back to the Holy Land to reclaim it as their own. He's done that already. He's got to bring back a state of Israel, restore a state of Israel in the Holy Land 2,000 years after Allah had destroyed it. He's done that already. And he'll have to cause that Israel to become the ruling state in the world, ruling the world. And those of us who are not spending all our time drinking tea and coffee and eating pan, and who are observing what's happening in the world, would know that that is exactly the direction in which we're moving now. That the United States is in decline, that Israel already controls the US Congress, and Israel is well on its way to replacing the United States as the ruling state in the world. And so it should not be long now from now. If Israel succeeds in replacing the United States, and that's why you're having what you're having now in Syria, that's why you had what you had in Libya, but Dajjal's warriors didn't know that. So they took weapons from NATO, and they took weapons from Saudi Arabia, which is an Israeli clone, and they took weapons from Libya, and they took weapons from Turkey, which is a member of NATO, and they went dancing merrily to overthrow the Libyan government. So NATO is now in control of Libya. I call them fools. They have eyes and they cannot see, and they're doing the same thing now in Syria. And an even bigger tragedy is now unfolding in Ukraine. Muslims at the heart of it in Ukraine. You would know that. So it should not be long from now before Israel achieves her objective. And when Israel becomes a ruling state, I don't see anything to prevent Israel, not this ummah, in the state in which it is now. Then a man will stand there in Jerusalem and declare, I'm the Messiah. So we are living in Akhir Zaman. And if we are living in Akhir Zaman, then the implications of having lost the wudu that Nabi Muhammad ﷺ has given us should wake us up. And the implications of having lost the money that the Quran and the Sunnah gave to us, and we're now using this bogus and fraudulent and utterly haram paper money, and I can speak like this because I have studied my subject. And they don't teach this subject in the Darul Ulum. The implications that we are living in Akhir Zaman is clear before our eyes now. Those who still deny that we are in Akhir Zaman will say to them, brother, Assalamu alaikum, I don't have any more time to waste. I got more important things to do. Leave them. And you forge ahead. And when you recognize that this is Akhir Zaman, then the imperative of unity is supreme. So we say, are the Shia kuffar? In order for you to have a fatwa of kufr to be valid, it has to have ijma'ul ummah. Ijma'ul ummah. The ulama have to accept it. If the ulama had accepted that the Shia were kuffar, it had to be done 1,000 years ago. Well, then how come that no one has protested for 1,400 years? There has been no movement, no agitation. no universal protest about the Shia performing the Hajj. Have you ever had any protests here in Cape Town? Have the ulama in Cape Town ever raised their voices and urged the people, let us protest, these are not Muslims, these are kuffar, they must not be allowed to perform the Hajj? Have you ever heard it in 1400 years? Well, I say, it's a little bit late in the day now to come with this nonsense. This fly-by-night fatwa that the Shia kuffar. I'm not impressed. Because for the fatwa to become valid, it must achieve ijma'ul ummah. And this fatwa has not achieved ijma'ul ummah. If the Shia are Muslims, how do we relate to them? إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. They're your brothers. So even though you have differences with them, you have to relate with them in a manner consistent with a fraternity. You differ with them, yes, as I do. And I say to them that whoever declares that Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu is a usurper is someone who hijacks somebody else and takes his place. Usurper. Very bad man. And you say of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was a usurper. And that Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he was a usurper. And that Uthman Ghani radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he was a usurper. We say, you are profoundly misguided. I tell them that. And despite the fact that I tell the Shia world precisely the words I've just said to you, the Shia world has still responded with fraternal relations with me. I've not cut any corners. I've been truthful and honest and forthright. And then on the other issue it divides us, that it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who decided on succession to rule in this ummah. And that he decided and conveyed to the Prophet ﷺ that it was Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu who must rule upon the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So I say you cast a vote of no confidence in the greatest leader of all times, Nabi Muhammad ﷺ. You are saying that he was such a total failure that every single one of all his companions were misguided. And as soon as he died, all of his companions turned their backs on him and disregarded what you say was a divine order, that Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu must succeed. And they chose Abu Bakr Siddiq. This is a vote of no confidence in the Prophet ﷺ. It makes no sense whatsoever. On the contrary, when we go to the Quran, which must be the means to unite us, the Quran speaks about وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُمْ, that leadership and how leadership is constituted, among other things, is decided not over there by Allah, but on the basis of mutual consultation. And so the companions radiallahu ta'ala anhum did not betray the Prophet ﷺ when they appointed Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu as Khalifa. And when Imam al-Mahdi comes, he's not going to be Shia. I tell the Shia this. And I went to Iran last June, my first time. And I met a large number of Iranian ulama. Yes. And they didn't throw me out of the hall. And they didn't expel me out of Iran. Even though I told them Imam al-Mahdi is not Shia. Because Imam al-Mahdi will come out of Medina and hurry to Mecca And the people of Mecca will come out to him and urge him to accept the bay'ah. And I said, Mecca has never been a Shia city. The people of Mecca will not go out to a Shia to give their bay'ah. So despite making these forthright statements, because I have spoken about Iran and the Shia, that they are Muslims, not kuffar, and I had praised Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who appeared to me to be heads and shoulders superior to all the other leaders we have, they were touched by my sincerity. And a bond has been established on the basis of which I can now struggle. Amongst my students, they are Salafi, although my teacher was Sufi. And so using this methodology, it is possible, I don't know whether we will succeed, but it is possible for us to try to bring the Sufi and the Salafi, the Shia and the Sunni together under one roof. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may bless us, all of us, for whatever effort we make in the cause of Muslim unity. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين وآخره. We have how much time left before the azan? Half an hour. Half an hour, not more than that. So this is going to be a very interesting session now, because we want not only questions, we want to hear your comments about the imperative of Muslim unity, how important it is, and what should we do to bring about unity between, for example, the Sufi and the Salafi, between the Shia and the Sunni. And before we invite you to pose your questions, what have we done? My students and I, we have launched projects of establishing Muslim villages in the remote countryside, in, alhamdulillah, several parts of the world. In Malaysia, where I'm now based, we have 4 projects already moving forward. And these are small communities. And in these communities, we will try to bring the Sufi and the Salafi together, the Shia and the Sunni together, to live together as a family. And our first step is that unity must be in the house of Allah, in the masjid. You have to start with the masjid. And how do we unite the people in the masjid? The Quran and the Sunnah. There you are. So even though it might be a beneficial religious practice, and even though we may have been practicing it for years and years and years and years, do not take out boxing gloves to fight over something which is not in the Sunnah. A practice. I'm not talking about a belief. I'm talking about a practice. A dua in which you raise your hand is a practice. Do not take out boxing gloves to fight over something which is not in the universally accepted Sunnah. That's the first step towards unity. And in this village, we will try to establish the deen, and money is a part of the deen. The money that you use is a part of the deen, because with money you got to pay your zakat, and when you marry you have to give the mahr. With money you have to buy the sheep for the qurban, for the akikah. With money you have to buy the food that you put into your stomach and your children's stomach. So if the money is bogus and fraudulent and haram, are we following the Quran and Sunnah, or have we abandoned the Quran and Sunnah? And we say that this money that we are now using, which has come to us from the Zionists, this paper, plastic, and electronic money which has come to us from the Zionist world, which is our greatest enemy, لَتَجِدَنَّ أَشَدَّ النَّاسِ عَدَاوَةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الْيَهُودِ, says Allah in the Quran. They are your worst enemies. And they are the ones who have given us this money, this monetary system that we are using. And everybody knows that the money which is in the Quran and Sunnah is dinar and dirham. You all know that. There is nobody who does not know that. Don't plead ignorance. Dinar and dirham, silver coins and gold coins. And they have disappeared today. And in our project of the Muslim village, we want to bring back the dinar and dirham. So, we are on the road trying to preserve the deen. So now let us hear your questions and your comments. First one, who will be the first? Okay, no questions from Brooklyn. All right.
Sheikh, so what do you feel are specific controversial differences between the Shias and the Sunnis, the Sufis and the Salafis that need to be at the moment put aside in order to establish this unity?
What are the matters over which they are boxing? The boxing gloves are out and the Shia and the Sunni are having a good fight. What are those issues that we should put aside? I have met with the Ayatollahs of Iran, who were the highest authority of the Shia world of Islam. And they all, without exception, declare that this is the Quran. There is no part of this Quran which is outside of it. All right? And so they have the same belief that we have concerning the Quran. But in the same way that you have Sufis and you have Sunni Muslims who go and bow down and make sajda before a grave. And I saw it with my own eyes. With my own eyes. Making sajda before a grave. Similarly, you have Shia who do all kinds of silly things. So you will not lump the whole Sunni world because this fellow is bowing down before a grave. Would you do that? Similarly, you will not label the whole Shia world with a methodology that should be thrown into a garbage bin because some Shia say this Quran is incomplete. These are some of the issues which can easily be disposed of. Okay? Like cursing the companions of the Prophet, Abu Bakr Siddiq and Umar Farooq and Usman Ghani and Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. And we have people with boxing gloves using this argument. Whereas when the revolution came to Iran in 1979, was it? They declared that this is a crime, criminal act. If you do this in Iran, they'll arrest you. So isn't it time to take the boxing gloves away and try to unite? Any more questions? Sheikh, yes. An Imam said that the Shia kuffar. Imam Ghazali says that the Shia kuffar. Okay. Were you here for my talk? You were not. That's why. It doesn't matter who makes a fatwa. It doesn't matter who makes a fatwa. Authority, supreme authority is only Allah's. And to the extent that the hadith is not in conflict with the Quran, a hadith is in conformity with the Quran, then the hadith is authoritative. Other than that, no one has authority in Islam. Nobody. None. And so if a fatwa is given that so and so is kafir, or this group is kafir, what do we need for it to be established? You need ijma'ul ummah. And if it had ijma'ul ummah, then the Shia would not have been performing the Hajj for 1400 years. So you don't need a PhD to come to the conclusion, which is fairly simple, that we have never had Ijma'ul Ummah, that the Shia are kuffar. And it is a little bit late now to come with this declaration that the Shia are kuffar and pick up the boxing gloves. More than boxing gloves, it's Kalashnikovs. Oh yes, because now what the Zionists want, what Dajjal wants, but these simpletons don't understand. Oh yes, and I have no regret of being angry. Oh, not at all. I love to be angry on this issue. See my anger. These simpletons who went dancing with Dajjal in Libya to overthrow the government in Libya. Oh, Imran Hussein is now a supporter of Gaddafi. Take that and throw it in a garbage bin. You should be ashamed of yourself for using that kind of argument against me. Shame on you. I'm not the supporter of any government in the world of Islam, and you know that. Dancing to Dajjal's tunes, taking help from NATO in the sky, taking weapons in Benghazi that the NATO had shipped into Benghazi, using the aid from the enemies of Islam to overthrow a government. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? And you're doing the same thing in Syria now. This is not the way. This is not the way. Rather, the way now is to recognize that the master plan is to bring about Shia-Sunni civil war in the world of Islam. That is the master plan of the enemy. And if you want to be part of the enemy's master plan, you are profoundly misguided. We're sorry for you. We don't want to be a part of that. And Allah is the judge as to who is right and who is wrong, who is rightly guided and who is not. And so I made my first visit to Iran for the first time in June. I think Sheikh Ali Mustafa has been to Iran already. Yeah. And they know my profile. It's public. And yet I was received with respect. They treated me with profound respect. And when I sat down with about 40 of their scholars, and these are specialists in Ilmu Akhiru Zaman. They brought all their specialists. And the session was about 3.5 hours. I didn't cut any corners, they didn't cut any corners. No, we held on to our position. And yet we were able to discuss, not debate, because I don't debate with anybody. We were able to discuss in an atmosphere that was mutually respectful. And at the end of it all, we could sit down and eat together and smile and laugh and joke with each other. It was very nice. Any more questions? Sheikh Ali Mustafa.
Assalamu alaikum. As much as we want to unite with the Shias, one of the vexing problems we have is the belief and practice of taqiyya. And they have been using it for ages. So how do we know that this man is not practicing taqiyya, but they have been doing it? You know, so that is the problem.
Okay.
You understand?
Yeah, concealing your true plan and seeking to deceive others. Well, the master in that today is not Iran, it's Saudi Arabia. Oh yes. The Saudis have betrayed Islam as never before in history. No people. It's not the Saudi people, the Saudi regime. And taqiyya is universally practiced today. All over the world there is taqiyya. For example, when they took the gold dinar and silver dirham out of the market and replaced it with this paper money, a subject that you have not studied, I hardly think you studied it, anybody, and a subject which is not taught in the Darul Uloom. So the products of the Darul Uloom do not know this subject. No. They did it by deception. Oh yes, by deception. And they fooled us. And today we're in this miserable state where Indonesia is in miserable poverty. It did happen by accident? Is it by accident that Indonesia is miserably poor? Is it by accident that Egypt is miserably poor? And but Tunisia is miserably poor, and Bangladesh is miserably poor, and Pakistan is miserably poor, and most of Africa is miserably poor? If that is happening by accident, you should take a one-way trip to the moon. Yeah. You got no intellect. You got no capacity to think. You've not studied. Why is it that there is such increasing poverty and destitution in the world? And for those who are indeed thinkers amongst you, and mashallah, Sheikh Ali Mustafa, some of the young ones, I am the teacher and they're the students and they're surpassing me now, mashallah, for the young ones. They can see that we are in fact moving towards a universal slavery tomorrow. Well, I'll tell you something. It is this monetary system which has played a significant role, deceiving us. We're being deceived with food. We're being deceived in the bedroom. Allah must not do the right thing. No. You and your wife sit down and plan. It's called Planned Parenthood. The Quran says, فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُهُنَّ. So now, in the nights of Ramadan, embrace them. وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. And now seek for what Allah has written for you. Maybe Allah has written 10 children for you. 4 boys, 6 girls. But now you and your wife are going to sit down and say, listen, first baby 3 years after marriage. And then you must have an interval. And then the second baby another 3 years later, and then close up shop, that's it. Huh? American Sunnah. It's called Planned Parenthood. Why does Dajjal want this? Because if women have large families, he can't bring them out into the public life. And the last people to come out to Dajjal will be women. In order for him to bring out women into the public life, women must have small families. And you must have some nanny and some servant or some to take care. Or something else, I don't know whether you've ever heard about it. It's called a daycare center. Ever heard of it? Yeah. Now, daycare center is a new mummy. New mummy. Don't get angry with me, because this is the child's plan. So he deceives our women in the last age. These are the last people to deceive. So there is taqiyya all over. How do we respond to taqiyya? The answer? Always put a good meaning to things until you have evidence to the contrary. And when the evidence to the contrary comes, then, if CNN tells you that the sun is shining, don't believe it. Go outside and look in the sky and see whether the sun is shining. That's the way to respond. In this way, even if you are mistaken concerning a person, there is no sin. It's only when the Turkish government came out in the open in Libya and showed me their true face. Only then did I denounce Erdogan and that Turkish government. But prior to that, I had a good opinion of them. Check out my profile and you'll see. So put a good meaning to things until evidence emerges to the contrary. Any more questions or comments? Yes. Are the Wahhabis Muslims? I am not a mufti of that caliber to deliver a fatwa of kufr. But my teacher, Maulana Fadlur Rahman Ansari, rahimahullah, did deliver one fatwa of kufr in his life. And he sent that fatwa and I got it. He considered the Qadiani, the followers of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, as kuffar. Okay? That fatwa of kufr against the Qadiani or the Ahmadiyya has one ijma'. We don't have any dissension on that issue. About the Wahhabi, today they are called Salafi. And I did not have the time in this talk to go into the subject as to what was the basic problem between us, the Salafi. The big problem between us is not their insistence on returning to the way of the Salaf, the early Islam. Okay? They want us to return to the original faith. This is what the religion was, and you all have changed it with all these different new things. We want you to remove that and go back to the original religion. We say, let's start with the masjid. So the Sufi and the Salafi and everybody else could be united in the house of Allah. Because anytime we see a religious practice in the house of Allah, which is not based on the universally accepted sunnah, we will try to take it out, remove it. You can put it in the private, and if anyone comes to criticize you for what is in the private, you can ship him out faster than Federal Express. Yeah. Why? Because he's an agent of fitna. That is not so much the problem, because we could handle that by beginning with the masjid. The bigger problem is the problem of methodology. The Salafi methodology and what I used to call the Sufi methodology is the methodology of al-ihsan. And on that battlefield, yes, you can fight. But when you fight on that battlefield, you fight as brothers, you fight as scholars, without any hatred for each other and animosity, no. There are no boxing gloves there. It's an intellectual debate on methodology. And I have been pursuing that debate with the Salafi for quite some time now on methodology. They say that only Allah and His Messenger are authorized to explain the Quran and Sunnah, Quran and Hadith. And if the Quran and Hadith was not explained by the Quran or by the Prophet ﷺ, and they include the Aslaf, the early Muslims, then no one is authorized to do so now. So if the Prophet said ﷺ that in Akhirul Zaman, the river Euphrates, this is in Bukhari, the river Euphrates will uncover a mountain of gold. You know what is a mountain because you got Table Mountain here. And you know what is gold, it's a metal. So you know what is a mountain of gold. That's what the hadith says. And people will fight over it, and 99 out of every 100 will be killed, but everyone will be saying, I will be the one who will survive. But the believers must not touch that gold. Good? This is the hadith. So Salafi methodology is since the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam did not interpret this hadith, nor did the Aslaf, the implication is that we must take it as face value, we must understand it literally. And hence we must wait for a mountain to come out of the river, and that mountain will be a mountain of gold. That's the Salafi methodology. No one is authorized to interpret it. Our view is different. And 2 nights ago I gave a lecture at another masjid. I don't know what the name of the masjid. Huh? What? Masjid al-Qarar, on the religious thought of Maulana Fadlur Rahman Ansari rahimahullah. And I don't have the time to repeat. And in that lecture I explained methodology. Amongst other things, that Allah has sent the Quran, time and again He says it in the Quran, I think it must be about a dozen times, that He has sent this Quran لِقَوْمِ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. He has sent this Quran to a people who not only think, but fikr is also to think things out. You got to think with this Quran. And therefore the Quran has in it that which must be thought out. There are verses in the Quran which are to be interpreted. They are called mutashabihat. And there's a methodology for interpretation. When we use this methodology, we come to a conclusion, and of course we must say Allah knows best, that the mountain of gold has already come out of the river. And we must not touch it. Mountain standing, of course, for something which is huge. And that which was underneath the river, which was huge, was oil. And so the hadith is telling us that oil is one day going to become black gold. Meaning that oil is going to function as gold. Gold is money. How can oil function as money? Answer: if you had studied the subject, you would know about the Bretton Woods Accord, and you'd know about the International Monetary Fund, from which this money that every single one of you is using, that's where it came from. And in that monetary system that the enemies of Islam constructed, the US dollar had a fig leaf to hide its shame. And that fig leaf was that the US dollar had a link with gold. And that link was that only the US dollar, no other money in the world, only the US dollar, that any central bank in the world was free to go to Washington with US dollars and demand that it be redeemed in gold at the rate of $35 to 1 ounce of gold. Okay? Charles de Gaulle in France was the only world leader who recognized his monetary system to be unjust and unfair. No Muslim leader, none, did what Charles de Gaulle did. The one exception in the world was Islam, was a man named, and he's forgotten today, Ahmad Sukarno in Indonesia, who took Indonesia out of the IMF and took Indonesia out of the United Nations. And then they overthrew him, and then Indonesia went back in. Charles de Gaulle decided that this was unjust and unfair, this monetary system. And France was the only country which kept on going back to Washington with US dollars and demanding the gold. But they couldn't continue to give the gold. Why? Because these camps, that's what they were, these camps had printed far more paper money than they had the gold. If you have 1 million ounces of gold, then you could only print 35 million US dollars, right? Unless you want to be dishonest. So then you print 350 million US dollars, but you only have 1 million ounces of gold. So they couldn't keep on giving France the gold. So in September 1971, after de Gaulle had died, France came again. And Nixon realized that the game was up. The situation was just too dangerous, that they might be aligned with some others in the line, seeking to have the dollars changed to gold. So Nixon decided, well, we can't keep this anymore, we've got to scrap the system. So he announced to the world, we gave our word, but we don't have to keep our word. And it tore up the Bretton Woods.